The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which Edmund Ashworth, the Duke of Carverley, would later consider significant. Tuesday was the day his steward presented the weekly accounts. Tuesday was the day the post came early. Tuesday was, by all measure, a day of ordinary business, and it was therefore the cruelest possible day for the world to tilt. He read it once, then again. Then he folded it along its original crease and placed it face down on the mahogany desk, as though turning it over might somehow reverse its contents. Your Grace, the woman you intend to marry is not the woman you believe her to be. Watch her when no one is watching. Listen when she believes no one can hear. What you discover will spare you a lifetime of elegant misery. No signature. The handwriting was careful, neither a servant's rough scrawl nor a gentleman's educated flourish. Someone in between. Someone who had chosen their words as deliberately as a surgeon chooses an instrument. Edmund stood from his desk and moved to the window. Below, the grounds of Ashworth Manor rolled outward in their late autumn undress. The oaks stripped bare, the gravel paths edged with frost, the fountain in the south garden silenced for the season. It was a landscape he had known since boyhood, and it had never once failed to settle him. Today it offered nothing. He told himself the letter was the work of a mischief-maker. There were always those who resented a duke's happiness, envious acquaintances, discarded suitors, servants with grievances and ink. He told himself Lady Cecilia Fontaine was everything she appeared, beautiful, well-bred, gracious, and genuinely fond of him. He had seen it in her eyes at the Whitmore ball when she laughed at something he said. He had felt it in the easy way she took his arm during their walks in the rose garden. He had almost convinced himself when, that very afternoon, he saw them. Not anything scandalous, nothing he could name with certainty or carry to a magistrate. Only this, Lady Cecilia and Lord Ashby standing together at the far end of the east corridor, half-shadowed by the afternoon light falling through the tall window. Ashby was speaking close to her ear, and Cecilia, who was by nature composed, was listening with a particular stillness that Edmund recognized as concentration, not comfort. Her hand rested briefly on Ashby's sleeve. A small gesture, perhaps innocent. But she did not remove it when she heard Edmund's approaching footstep. She simply lowered her eyes and smiled at the wall. He greeted them. They greeted him. Nothing was wrong. Everything was wrong. He could not confront her, not without evidence, and not without the evidence of his own instincts, which he did not entirely trust. He was a man who had always been more comfortable with certainty than suspicion. He could not send investigators through his own household like a man routing out rats. That felt beneath him, beneath her, beneath what they were supposed to be to one another. And so, in the privacy of his dressing room that evening, Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Carverley, arrived at the most undignified and necessary decision of his adult life. He would go into his own house as a stranger. He would see what strangers saw. Thomas Hale, his valet of 11 years, received the proposition with the expression of a man who has long suspected his employer of hidden depths and is only now being proven correct. He said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "Very well, Your Grace," and went to find suitable clothing. The transformation was more thorough than Edmund had anticipated. Thomas sourced plain dark livery from the footman's store, slightly too short in the leg, slightly broad in the shoulder, smelling of cedar and someone else's life. He showed Edmund how to carry himself differently, shoulders inward, gaze downward, the quiet erasure of presence that a good servant practiced like a second language. Edmund was told to speak less. He was told to move with purpose but without authority. He was told to become, in effect, invisible. "And if someone recognizes me?" Edmund asked. "They won't," Thomas said simply. "People see what they expect to see, Your Grace. No one in this house expects to see you carrying a tray." He was introduced to the household staff the following morning as Edward Cole, a footman hired temporarily ahead of the engagement ball. "Mrs. Aldridge, the housekeeper, looked him over with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had managed 40 servants for 20 years and harbored no illusions about any of them. She assigned him to the East Wing. She told him to keep the sconces clean, to be silent in the corridors, and to under no circumstances speak to the family unless spoken to first. "Yes, Mrs. Aldridge," Edmund said. She walked away without a second glance. It was the first time in his adult life that a woman had walked away from him without a second glance, and the sensation was so foreign that he stood motionless for a moment in the servants' corridor, recalibrating everything. The work was hard in ways he had not expected. Not physically brutal, but relentlessly demanding in its smallness. The precise folding of napkins, the silent refilling of glasses, the invisible choreography of maintaining a house so that those who lived in it need never think about how it continued to exist. He had always known, in the abstract, that his comfort required labor. He had simply never stood inside that labor before. He was carrying a silver tray through the main corridor when Lady Cecilia passed him. She was dressed for the afternoon, her dark hair pinned elegantly, a small smile on her lips from whatever thought occupied her. She walked within 2 feet of him. Her gaze moved over him the way a gaze moves over furniture, noting presence, registering nothing, and she continued down the corridor without pause. Edmund stood perfectly still. It was only a moment, only a woman failing to recognize a man in different clothes. And yet something in his chest shifted, like a stone settling deeper into cold water. He adjusted the tray. He walked on. And from behind the closed door of the drawing room, where the fire was burning and the curtains were half drawn against the pale autumn light, he heard Cecilia's laughter, low, private, and utterly at ease. He did not recognize it. In all their months of courtship, he had never once heard her laugh like that. He stood in the corridor, tray in hand, and felt the first fracture form. 3 days inside his own house taught Edmund Ashworth things that 34 years of living in it never had. He learned that the kitchens ran on an entirely separate economy of loyalty and grievance, governed by cook's moods and the particular politics of who received the warmest spot by the hearth. He learned that the maids moved through the upper corridors in a kind of practiced silence that was not submission but strategy. They spoke freely the moment the family's doors were closed, and their observations were sharper, funnier, and considerably more accurate than anything exchanged in the drawing room above. He learned that his own portrait in the main hall, the one commissioned at great expense by his mother, was universally referred to by the staff as the gloomy one. He might have smiled at that, under different circumstances. The East Wing was his assigned territory, and it was there that the days acquired their particular weight. Cecilia occupied the guest suite at the corridor's end, a generous arrangement of rooms that caught the morning light and smelled faintly of the rosewater she favored. Edmund tended the fire each morning before she rose, laid fresh linens, carried trays. He was efficient and silent. He was, in all visible respects, Edward Cole, a competent, unremarkable footman going quietly about his work. But he was watching. In these unguarded hours, away from the candle-lit performances of dinner and the careful choreography of courtship, Cecilia Fontaine revealed herself in increments. They were small things, individually dismissible. She addressed the housemaids without looking at them, not cruelly, but with the complete indifference of someone who had genuinely never considered that the hands clearing her table might belong to a person worth acknowledging. When Edmund, as Edward, set her morning tray before her, she stirred her tea and continued reading without a word, not so much as a glance. He had once spent an entire evening composing a letter to her about the quality of autumn light. One afternoon, passing her sitting room, he heard her speaking to no one, or so he first thought. He paused. She was alone, standing before the window that overlooked the south lawn, her reflection ghosted in the glass beside the real her. She was speaking in a low, deliberate murmur, almost like a woman rehearsing. Ashworth Estate, the northern properties alone. She paused, turned slightly, resumed. The London house, the Carverley Trust, the Derby holdings. Her voice had a quality he had never heard in it before. Not warmth, not wit, arithmetic. Edmund moved on before she could turn fully and see him. That evening, Eliza found him in the stable yard. She was 19, a housemaid of 2 years, with a practical face and the unconscious kindness of someone who had never been taught to perform it. She had come to return a pail left by one of the grooms, and she found Edmund standing in the cold with no particular errand and no explanation, staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man reading words written on the inside of his own skull. She did not ask him what was wrong. She simply stood nearby for a moment and then said, conversationally, as though continuing a discussion they had already been having, "It gets heavy sometimes, all of it, this house." He looked at her. "Big houses always do," she continued simply. "Lots of expectation inside them. You can feel it in the walls." She took her pail and went back inside, and Edmund stood in the cold for another long moment, feeling, absurdly, steadied. The shattering came on the third day. He had been sent to collect the tea service from the east sitting room, a small, private parlor where Cecilia sometimes received Lord Ashby for what the household understood to be friendly afternoon visits between old acquaintances. Edmund approached the door. It was not fully closed. He could see, through the narrow gap, the edge of the settee, the low fire, the silver pot on the table catching the light. He raised his hand to knock, and then he heard his own name. "Edmund is entirely too trusting," Cecilia was saying. Her voice was relaxed in a way it never was with him, loose, careless, the voice of a woman among her actual thoughts. "It is his most useful quality and his most unfortunate one." Ashby laughed. Edmund recognized the laugh from the corridor 3 days ago. "He suspects nothing." "Nothing," Cecilia said. "He is too noble for suspicion, too principled. You know the type. He believes what he sees because he cannot imagine that someone would construct what he is seeing." A pause, the soft sound of a cup being set down. "And after the ball?" Ashby asked. "After the title is secure," Cecilia said, "the arrangement changes. He will not cause difficulties. Men like Edmund never do. They suffer beautifully and privately and call it dignity." A small, practiced laugh. "I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost?" Ashby echoed. "Almost," she agreed. Edmund's hand was still raised to knock. He lowered it. He stepped back from the door with the slow, deliberate care of a man moving across ice. One wrong shift of weight and everything gives way entirely. He walked to the linen cupboard at the corridor's end, stepped inside and closed the door behind him. In the dark, among the pressed sheets and the smell of lavender, he stood without moving for a very long time. He did not cry. He was not, in that moment, even certain he felt. What he experienced was more structural than emotional, the sensation of something load-bearing giving way inside him, the silent collapse of a thing he had not known he was building until it was gone. He had allowed himself, quietly and without announcement, to love her. He understood that now. He understood it most clearly at the precise moment it became irrelevant. After a time, he straightened his livery. He smoothed the front of his plain, dark jacket with both hands, a gesture so habitual and so ducal that, had anyone seen it, the disguise would have ended there. He opened the cupboard door. He walked back down the corridor. He collected the tea service from another room. He carried it downstairs. He found Eliza in the kitchen passage and, without explanation, simply stood nearby for a moment, the way she had stood near him the night before. She looked at him once with her practical eyes and said nothing at all. It was, he would think later, the kindest thing anyone had done for him in years. That night, in the small footman's room where he had been sleeping, a narrow bed, a single candle, walls closer than any room he had ever occupied, Edmund Ashworth made his decision. Not in anger, not in the hot, reckless fire of a wounded man, but in the way a duke makes a decision when he has finally understood the full weight of what is before him, deliberately, quietly, and without possibility of reversal. He would end it. But he would end it as himself. Tomorrow, Edward Cole would disappear, and Edmund Ashworth would return. He dressed slowly the following evening. Thomas stood behind him in the dressing room, working the cufflinks with practiced fingers, and neither man spoke for a long while. The plain dark livery of Edward Cole had been folded and returned to the footman's store. In its place, Edmund's finest evening coat, deep charcoal with silver buttons, pressed to a severity that bordered on armor. His cravat was white and exact. His boots reflected the candlelight like still water. He looked at himself in the glass and recognized the man looking back. He had not been certain until that moment that he would. "Your Grace," Thomas said quietly, stepping back. That was all. It was enough. The ballroom of Ashworth Manor was magnificent in the way that only old houses understand magnificence, not through novelty or extravagance, but through sheer accumulated weight of beauty. The chandeliers held 300 candles between them. The floors had been polished to a gloss that caught every light and doubled it. Flowers from the succession houses lined the walls in great arrangements of ivory and deep red, and the musicians in the gallery were playing something bright and Viennese that filled the room like warm water fills a bath. Edmund arrived late. Not carelessly late, deliberately late, in the way a man arrives when he has decided the room should register his entrance rather than absorb it quietly. Conversation shifted as he moved through the guests. He was gracious, measured, and perfectly correct in every greeting. But there was something in his bearing that several people noticed without being able to name, a stillness at his center, like a lake that has frozen cleanly overnight and now reflects everything with unusual clarity. Cecilia was radiant. He would not deny it even now. She stood near the center of the room in a gown of deep blue silk, her dark hair threaded with small pearls, her laugh rising and falling with the ease of a woman entirely at home in her own performance. She turned when she saw him and her face arranged itself into an expression of genuine-seeming warmth, eyes brightening, one gloved hand extended. "You are late," she said, with the particular smile she reserved for indulgences. "Forgive me," he said. He took her hand. He bowed over it correctly. He did not hold it a moment longer than propriety required. They danced. He was a good dancer, had always been, and they moved well together, which struck him now as one of the crueler ironies the evening had on offer. Over her shoulder he could see Lord Ashby near the far wall, holding a glass of champagne with the studied nonchalance of a man who has rehearsed looking comfortable. Their eyes met briefly. Ashby looked away first. Midway through the second dance, Edmund excused himself. He found Thomas at the edge of the room and exchanged a single nod. Thomas crossed the ballroom quietly and approached Lord Ashby with the unhurried efficiency of a man delivering a routine message. He pressed a sealed letter into Ashby's hand and withdrew. Edmund watched Ashby open it, watched the color recede from his face the way tide withdraws from shore, slowly and then all at once. Ashby read it twice. He pocketed it. He set his champagne glass on the nearest surface and within 10 minutes had made his quiet apologies to the room and disappeared into the night. Edmund returned to Cecilia. "A private toast," he said, offering his arm, "before the formal announcement. I have had them prepare the study." She smiled, pleased, unsuspecting, already composing her expression for the evening's crescendo. "How thoughtful," she said, and took his arm. The study was warm. 2 glasses of wine had been poured and stood on the desk, untouched. The fire was the room's only extravagance. Everything else was plain: books, papers, the tools of a working estate. Edmund closed the door. He did not move toward the wine. He stood before the fire and looked at her directly, in the way he had not permitted himself to look at anyone for 3 days. "I know," he said. 2 words. He watched them land. Her face did not collapse immediately. She was too composed for that, too practiced. For a moment she held her expression in place by sheer discipline, the smile dimming slowly like a candle running low on wax. Then she said with careful lightness, "Edmund, what the sitting room," he said. "The East Corridor, 3 days ago. I heard everything, Cecilia." The smile went out entirely. He told her then, quietly, methodically, and without cruelty, precisely what he had heard. The title, the arrangement, the holdings listed like livestock, the assessment of his character delivered with the casual authority of someone who believes they are completely alone. He did not raise his voice. He did not require her to speak. He simply laid it before her, the way a man lays evidence on a table, not for argument but for acknowledgement. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Only the fire spoke. "The engagement is ended," he said. "I have already written to your father. The matter will be managed privately, no announcement, no scandal, a mutual and dignified dissolution. Not for your sake." He paused. "For mine. I will not be made cruel by this. I will not give you that." Cecilia opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face that he had not expected, not calculation, not defiance, but something rawer and considerably less rehearsed. Her eyes dropped to the floor between them. "Edmund," she began. "The door is open," he said gently. She left without another word. He listened to her footsteps cross the hall, precise and diminishing, until the house swallowed them entirely. He stood alone before the fire for a long time. In the morning, the guests departed with the polite efficiency that good breeding demands of awkward situations. By 9 o'clock the carriages were gone, the gravel raked smooth, and Ashworth Manor had returned to its own quiet. Edmund stood at the study window in the gray morning light, Thomas nearby, both of them watching the last carriage disappear between the oaks. "Eliza," Edmund said, "the housemaid. Would you ask her to come, please?" Thomas went without question. A few minutes passed. Then a knock, tentative, correct, at the study door. She stood in the doorway in her plain uniform, composed but uncertain, her practical eyes moving carefully across the room until they found him. Recognition arrived in them slowly, then completely. Her face did not change dramatically. She was not a woman given to dramatics, but something in it settled, as though a question she had not known she was carrying had been quietly answered. "Eliza," Edmund said. He reached into his desk and produced an envelope which he set on the corner nearest her. "For your family, with my gratitude, which is considerably larger than that envelope but must, for propriety's sake, be contained within it." She looked at the envelope, then at him. "You were cold," she said simply. "In the stable yard. Anyone would have, not anyone," he said. "You." She took the envelope with steady hands and dipped a small, dignified curtsy. At the door she paused, turned back once and looked at him with the frank and level gaze of someone who has decided to say a true thing. "I hope it gets lighter, Your Grace. The house." Then she was gone. Edmund turned back to the window. The grounds of Ashworth stretched before him in the pale morning. The bare oaks, the silent fountain, the gravel paths laid out with the patient geometry of generations. The same landscape he had stood before when the letter arrived on a Tuesday and the world had first begun to tilt. It looked different now. Not better, not worse. Truer, perhaps. As though 3 days inside his own walls, dressed in someone else's clothes, had cleaned a particular glass through which he now saw everything with unwelcome and necessary precision. The wound was real. He did not diminish it. He had loved her, or loved what he had believed her to be, which amounted in the mathematics of heartbreak to the same injury. But something else was also true, and he turned it over now in the pale light like a coin he had found unexpectedly in a coat he had not worn in years. He knew his house now. He knew the names of the women who pressed his linens and the man who salted the front steps before dawn. He knew that his portrait was called the Gloomy One, and he found, to his mild surprise, that he intended to do something about that. He had gone into his house looking for the truth about his fiancée. He had not expected to find the truth about himself. Edmund Ashworth, Duke of Carverley, straightened at the window, clasped his hands behind his back, and looked out at the grounds of his estate, his home, his inheritance, his responsibility, with the clear and sober eyes of a man who has been remade quietly and permanently by 3 days of carrying someone else's silver. He was not the same man who had stood here on Tuesday. He was, he thought, a considerably better one.